IMF World Bank annual meetings opens in New York in the month of November. On the sidelines of the event will be a strategic forum on Africa known as Africa at the World Bank. It would be a high-level symposium that convenes African policymakers, economists, business leaders, researchers, and development partners. The gathering provides a strategic platform for frank dialogue on Africa's most pressing economic challenges while harnessing the continent's vast potential for transformative growth. Tonight, we are going in-depth on the stakes and prospects of the forum for the African continent. Join us with our guest in a moment. My guest is the co-chair of Denis and Foretia Foundation and executive chairman of the Nkafu Policy Institute, a leading Cameroonian think tank. A surgeon by training, he has always been involved in philanthropic activities and issues relating to governance, international development, as well as public policy. He holds a bachelor's degree with honors in biological sciences from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and a Doctor of Medicine degree from Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, Nashville in Tennessee. He also holds a master's in public health from the Bloomberg School of Public Health at the Johns Hopkins University and a master's in business administration from the Carey School of Business, also at the Johns Hopkins University. Join me to welcome Dr. Denis Foretia, the executive director of the Nkafu Policy Institute. Hello, Dr. Foretia. Thank you for joining us live from Chicago in the United States. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Peter. Really honored to be talking with you and your televiewers today.
The Nkafu Policy Institute will host the high-level forum, which is on the theme, Accelerating Africa's Economic Transformation. Of course, the forum is coming on the sidelines of the IMF World Bank meetings. This forum brings together key policymakers and thought leaders. I'd like us to start by you telling us personally what is economic transformation within the context of the 21st century in Africa.
Well, thank you very much, Peter and the team. And thank you for having us talk about this very important forum that will be holding at the sidelines of the World Bank IMF annual meetings. Economic transformation is really how we ensure that our economies move from an agrarian economy, an informal economy, into an economy where we have very, very good, decent jobs, an economy where there is sustainable growth, an economy where folks are able to provide for their, beyond their daily subsistence, but into the future, and an economy where it is very resilient, where we are not susceptible to a lot of external shocks, where we have good trade within our continent, but also externally, and a continent, really an economy where we have moved, we've structurally changed our systems to be really resilient. That is what we are looking at when we talk about, economic transformation, where we go from just, primary resources to, the tertiary resources, the industrial productions within the continent, within our countries, and one that really leads to sustainable growth. So that's what we are really talking about when we refer to economic transformation.
Now, why the focus on the subject matter of economic transformation?
Well, the subject matter is extremely important. My wife, Lenora, talks about this all the time, because when you look at economic transformation, in order for economies to grow, and we have a lot of experience on the continent, in order for economies to grow, there are many things that are important. First, you need an enabling environment, an environment where it's conducive for business, it's conducive for anyone to start a business. You need that. You need a secure environment. That means you need places where an environment where there is very little conflict or less conflict. There is not an absence of conflict, but a situation in the countries where conflict is better managed. There are legal procedures that ensure that any disputes can be easily adjudicated using through the law, and where that is really followed. The third thing is that you need strong governance systems. The legal and the governance systems are extremely important to be able to ensure that economic growth happen. And in addition, you need the skills, the skill sets from an education perspective. What are the skills that are being impacted on students, on learners every day? And are those skills compatible with the types of jobs and the types of opportunities that we need in order to grow our economies? So when you look at economic transformation, it is really an all-encompassing, encompassing move to ensure that the economy, the entire country, moves in the forward direction.
Now, for many years, Africa has been on the subject matter of discussions amongst officials and policy makers. What, of course, makes this particular forum different and unique from the rest?
Well, I'll tell you that, first of all, as you clearly stated, Africa has been, for a very long time. I mean, we know the Berlin Wall, the Berlin Conference in 1884, that led to the partition of Africa, the scramble for Africa as we know it, and the current, national boundaries that we have are really a result of that. Most of the time, decisions about Africa are made without Africa. Decisions about us on the international scale, international systems are made without really us being on the table. When we look at the World Bank and IMF annual meetings, the World Bank, the Bretton Woods institutions were all put in place before you had independent African countries. And so the vast majority of decision-making on the Bretton Woods institutions has very little influence from African countries. But the bulk, a substantial amount of what is decided on or who gets to be affected by those decisions are us Africans. So it has become extremely important for us to increasingly, as Africans, exert our voice on the international stage. In all these decision-making bodies, for us to have a visible, influential presence. And that is really one of the things that we are trying to impart with this. I mean, back in 2018 in Indonesia, during the World Bank annual meeting in Indonesia, I was there with a couple of, Lenora and others were there, but it was very clear that there was very little involvement of Africans on the decision-making table. And that's part of the reason why we've really worked hard over the years to ensure that such a forum like this can actually come to life.
Now, when you look at the African continent, what assessment can you make about its economic transformation drive and challenges that affect this particular move?
Well, the continent, as we always say, I mean, it's very common nowadays for you to hear that the continent is a continent of a lot of potential. Now, that is true, but increasingly, I keep reminding us that nobody eats potential. There is no farmer who eats potential. There is no, school child who studies potential and lives off of potential. So while Africa and the rest of the continent, we have this potential, I think we are somewhat too happy in saying that we have this potential, but we are not doing a lot to be able to change or take this potential from simply being a potential to actual reality. Now, you would hear from the World Bank and IMF that Africa's growth, last year in 2024 was, 3.5%. We are going up, projected to 3.8. But I'll tell you that growth by itself, I don't have to remind you. You ask the question, where are the jobs for that growth? Our economies, African economies, are still very, as they say, immature economies. When you have mature economies like Western economies, the United States, Canada, or so, a growth of 1%, 2% is very sizable. For us in Africa, we have what is known as jobless growth. you have growth, but folks don't have the jobs, right? They don't have the good paying jobs that moves them from the informal sector, that ensures that they can pay the school fees of their children or put food on the table, 3 square meals a day. It's difficult. So overall, while there is some progress, the progress is very, very minimal across the continent. There are also many countries, especially us in Cameroon, where we have a lot, we are oil producers as we are classified. You know, the oil producing countries have a different economic structure than the non-oil producers. We have countries that are making progress regarding services and providing top-line services, but the situation across the continent is very diverse, right? It's very diverse, but one thing is very clear, is that the youth bulge is significant. The number of young people who are graduating every day and who need good paying jobs continues to grow at an exponential rate. And as country, as leaders, it is our job, as policymakers as well, to figure out how to create the ecosystem that ensures that good paying jobs can be produced and that our people, our countrymen and women, have the necessary skills to be able to take on those jobs and help in our economic growth.
Now, Dr. Foretia, let's now look at the theme of the forum. Now, one of the key aspects that will come on that discussion is development finance. For some experts, we're thinking the development finance mechanism for Africa is very crucial for the industrialization and transformation growth of the continent. What are some of the most promising, innovative means, apart from traditional aid, that can accelerate the transformation sector?
Well, thank you very much, Peter. It is very clear from every African that Africa's economic transformation will not happen from aid. Aid has never developed any country. Aid will never develop any country. We need, in Africa and across the continent, we need free, fair trade. You need fair trade. You need opportunities to transform primary commodities into finished products. You need that to happen, and you need mechanisms like the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement to be able to expand and accelerate, as you hear the theme of this forum, accelerate Africa's economic transformation. You need mechanisms like the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement to be really implemented across countries and across regional economic communities in very significant substantive ways. Those are some of the mechanisms that would ensure that our growth, our economic transformation is durable, is sustainable. It is not, really, as I said earlier, influenced significantly by external shocks. But when you talk about development finance, to your question, we know that development finance historically, as through the Bretton Woods institutions, the rates have not been usually very fair for the African countries. Now, I'll make a distinction between concessional lending that is provided by development partners at very, very low interest rates. So very low interest rates, less than 1%, 2% or so interest rate, and with a longer period to repay the loan that's provided, versus commercial financing. Commercial financing, the rates that you get, the interest rates for the commercial financing is much higher, and you really don't have a long grace period. So when we talk about, development finance, most of the time we are referring to the non-commercial concessional financing. Now, in that area, the African continent and African countries, by and large, have also been, shortchanged in the whole financing arena. And you would hear, if you follow the recent conversations, that we want to make sure that the financing architecture the development financing architecture at the Bretton Woods institutions level is fairer for Africans and African countries. The other thing I would say very briefly is that when you look at how interest rates are determined, there is all risk, credit risk, where countries are evaluated. There is a credit risk that's assigned, a credit score basically that's assigned per country. Big companies have a credit rating. But when you look at the major credit rating companies in the world who rate African countries, the Moody's or so, they are very, I don't want to say biased, but the understanding of the African context is not very strong. So you've seen a move across the continent to create an African credit rating institution to be able to better, contextualize the ecosystem in African countries and make sure that African countries are not borrowing at the very elevated interest rates that does not really correlate with the realities on the ground. So those are some of the moves and the initiatives that are being pushed that we are supporting and pushing to ensure that you have a fairer access to capital for each country to be able to support their development aspirations.
You just spoke moments ago there about the African Continental Free Trade Area, and that has led me to or regional trade, as they usually call it. We so much talked in conference rooms. The implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area is still facing some obstacles. We'll take the example of the CEMAC zone, where the free movement of goods and people still remains a problem. We hear of clashes between Cameroon and Gabon, Cameroon and Equatorial Guinea, where Cameroonian nationals are being chased away. Movement in the sub-region is still very, very restrictive. Now, what measures could the governments of African countries take in a bid to fast-track regional trade and especially economic integration of the continent?
Very, very important question, Peter. Because when you look at the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, it's a very, very important framework. It's a very, very important development tool. As you know, this Continental Free Trade Area Agreement was really necessary because intra-African trade is extremely low. It is less than 20%. So less than 2 out of 10 trade that happens between countries is between African countries. Cameroon, for example, we have more of our trade externally than with Nigeria or the CEMAC region, cumulatively. So it is very important for us to be able to trade between African countries at a very high level. To say close to 40% will be good. Europe is at 67% or so of intra-European trade. So it is extremely important. But as you mentioned, there are many barriers to facilitating that trade. Part of the reason is that we have to realize that implementation will not be uniform. There would be countries that take the lead. And my argument, arguments we've made is that the major countries on the continent, when they take the lead in facilitating trade, let's say trade between Nigeria and South Africa, or Nigeria and Morocco, or Nigeria and Egypt, Nigeria and Kenya, or Cameroon and Nigeria in particular, those types of powerhouses, trade between powerhouses would help break a lot of these barriers that you face, right? It would help break that, because I'll tell you that, we in Cameroon, yes, we are 30 million plus, but when you look to our neighbor Nigeria, it's 200 million, a trade with 200 million and significantly larger. So there is impetus for us to trade more. When we look at Gabon, which is a much smaller economy relative to Cameroon, there is impetus for Gabonese to trade more with Cameroonian. And so while there are still barriers, and a lot of it is still non-tariff barriers, as we say, is not necessarily a tax, but you have a lot of controls between Gabon and and Cameroon. I think one of the studies that was done showed that there were at least 18 border control or stops controls within the road between Gabon and Cameroon. 18 stops. And you know what happens during those stops? Those barriers of corruption is very prevalent.
And it was almost 40 between Cameroon and Chad.
Okay, you see, almost 40, stop checks between Cameroon and Chad. So we cannot really want to accelerate our economic transformation or our trade between Cameroon and Chad. Remember, Chad is a landlocked country. So Chad has to go through Cameroon in order to access, whether is the sea. I mean, we have the Chad-Cameroon pipeline that created because it's a landlocked country. So in order to facilitate that, a lot of the non-tariff barriers, need to be addressed.
This forum will also focus on human capital, and for many experts, economic transformation is impossible without investment in people. What are the top priorities for improving education and healthcare in Africa in a bid to build a healthy workforce capable of driving the transformation drive?
Well, I think, Peter, you hit the nail there. It's all about the people. It's all about the people. Innovation happens because of people. Humans are extremely, I don't have to remind you about that. We are a very innovative group. That innovation, to stimulate and propel that innovation, it requires a good ecosystem to push that. You need people to be healthy in order for you to be, to contribute adequately. In economics and health economics, we have a concept called the disability adjusted life years. We call it DALI. A healthy human being who is a healthy adult, 40, 30-year-old healthy adult with no medical issues is one DALI. When you have heart problems, you are sick, you cannot contribute fully to the economic growth of the country. You are considered less than one DALI because you are not fully healthy to be able to do the type of work that you need to do. So what does that mean? That means there has to be significant investments in education, especially starting very early childhood education, skills development, technical skills development, skills in science, technology, engineering, and math, an area where we are chronically underrepresented across the continent, in the STEM areas, as they say. So there has to be significant investments in that. Now, that's on the education side, especially on the skills side, as well as the vocational training piece of it, which for the most part in many of our African countries has really gone to the back burner. But that's an area where we need renewed investment in. When you look at the health side, there is a lot that have to do with healthcare financing. There was a move a few years ago on universal health coverage to be able to ensure that we could provide health insurance to the cross section of our populations. Cameroon, for example, started implementing that, but we have a long way to go in implementing universal health coverage. But there is a real need for us to ensure that there is better coverage. Our team did a study recently where we looked at out-of-pocket payments. When folks go to the hospital, the vast majority of Cameroonians, for example, I keep talking about Cameroon because that's where your viewership is international, but being based in Cameroon, this is extremely important for Cameroonians. The vast majority of Cameroonians, 97% of folks do not have any form of health insurance. And so you have what we call catastrophic, financial toxicity, where folks are sick, somebody goes to the hospital and they are, adult in 40 years old, very active, but they have, some trauma, they go to the hospital and, the medical bills, pretty much make them go forever. They cannot extricate themselves from all the debt that they've accumulated, trying to deal with that. So there is still a huge huge effort that needs to be made in financing health systems, healthcare financing on the continent. And this is part of the issue that we are looking to raise and continue to raise during the forum with all the stakeholders regarding the need for new mechanisms and sustained commitment by ministries of health. There is what we know as the Abuja Declaration. The Abuja Declaration was by health ministers of health more than 2 decades ago, who pledged to ensure that they will work with ministers of finance to ensure that the budget for health in the health budget was going to approach 10%. Believe you me, very few countries have had their budgets approach 5%, of the annual budget being directed to health. But there is no way we are going to actually transform the continent without very, very strong human capital that is critical for anything to really move forward.
Okay, let's look at another aspect, which is technology. How can governments bridge the technology divide?
Well, technology is, first of all, something that, as I tell folks all the time, technology is something that you will be wise to adopt it early on and not wait to see how it goes. For example, when the internet, the whole age of the internet, there were folks who we classically know there are early adopters and there are late adopters or so. But with technology, you want to be an early adopter because the speed at which technology evolves is so rapid that when you don't have the base, it becomes very difficult for you as a country, as a people, to catch up. So, for example, we are talking currently today about artificial intelligence, and as I travel the world, I see the pace at which artificial intelligence is being incorporated in other economies, in other countries. And on the continent, that pace is really slower, not as robust. And there are a multitude of reasons there. Because when you look at comparing ourselves to, let's say, Latin America, almost 95% of households in Latin America have electricity. Full running electricity. That means they have internet that runs 98, 95, 97% of the time. Now, can you say that for most of our African countries? Can you say that for Cameroon? Can you say that for Gabon? In Cameroon, 53% of our households are have electricity, and most of the time that electricity is not regular. Right? So we cannot really build up and catch up with the artificial intelligence revolution when we still have some foundational, fundamental issues to put in place. When you look at technology, the other issue that I really want to bring here is the issue of data. Data. Part of the things that really prevents us from really growing is lack of good data. And lack of good data is an issue that most of our countries we need to really work on for us to move forward.
Now, let's look at the issue of governance. Governance and stability plays a key role in the economic transformation of many countries. Now, what measures like the fight against corruption, security contribute to the economic transformation drive of African countries?
Governance is a key pillar. Most of the time, when you look at our countries and the fact that it has been shown that the strength of the governance, of the openness of governance in a system with good processes and procedures being well implemented, is directly correlates with the economic transformation or growth in that country, the resilience there. Because governance is multifaceted, right? Governance is not one thing. Governance is the ability of farmers to go to their local their local leaders and say, hey, The fertilizers or so that were earmarked for this particular community have been embezzled, and we need accountability for that. That is governance. Right? Governance is the ability, like we have in Cameroon right now on elections, to be able to have free, fair elections and elections that are credible. That is part of governance. Governance is when, a police officer stops you on the road and says, let me check your books, and they check your books and for your car, and everything is fine, and they say, thank you very much, move forward. Right? That is good governance. Or if they check your books and you don't have every item that's there, they penalize you, and you go and you regulate that, by paying a fine or doing whatever is expected by the law. So governance is extremely important across the board. Now, the openness of governance, you will see that many African countries that are a little bit more open, more accountable, have a more robust ecosystem, economic ecosystem, where the growth, the jobs, the resilience of those countries are much more robust than many of the countries we see in Central Africa, for example. Well, it will not surprise you that when you think of human development indices across the continent, the vast majority of countries are at the bottom. Let me repeat that. The vast majority of countries at the very bottom of these human development indices are countries in Central Africa. So governance plays a key role in economic transformation, and the ability for us to have accountable governance systems is something that has to do with the people, the level of education and accountability, and the different levers that can be pulled on to ensure that we have an accountable system. So it cannot be neglected at all.
You are the head of the Nkafu Policy Institute, which is the leading think tank in Cameroon and Central Africa. For a forum like this one, talking about the African continent, how can it boost think tanks in Africa, particularly those in Central Africa where you have been working closely with?
Thank you, Peter. So one of the things that's very important is that we at Nkafu, at Nkafu Policy Institute, we have been very clear that there is a key role for think tanks and policy research institutions to play in the economic transformation of the countries and the continent. Because it is very important for us to translate empiric research that's done on the ground and what we know works, into policies. Because, Peter, I always say this, it is very difficult for you to change a bad policy. When a policy has been adopted, a bad policy that has been adopted, it is very difficult to change it. So it is very important for us to make sure that we don't adopt bad policies to start with. Very important. And that's the role of think tanks. That's what we do. That's what our team and, the more than, 50 members of our team work on to ensure that, the right policies can be put in place at the first go. So this is exactly what we are looking to expand. I mean, we convened this forum, Nkafu, convened this forum in Washington, D.C. We are working with other partners, Afrobarometer in Ghana, the African Union Development Agency, other NEPAD, as co-conveners, to be able to ensure that think tanks and policy research institutions have a key stake, and we can enforce that key stake here in ensuring that both policymakers and also development practitioners are on the table and in line with what we are proposing.
Now, how can this forum help to amplify the voice of Africa, especially the priorities of the continent on the global stage? Of course, I know that that's the reason why it's been taken to Washington.
Well, it's what we are saying is that wherever decisions are being made or conversations about Africa, Africans have to be on the table in very substantive, significant ways. And that's why we've decided that at forums like the World Bank annual meeting, there has to be a significant African presence on during these conversations. And that's what we are doing to ensure that our voice, the role, the perspective, the viewpoint, what Africa is looking for is on the table. And this is something that we are taking across the road when Africa has recently been admitted into the G20 countries. And so there is also that push to ensure that Africa's voice through the African Union is amplified. It is not fragmented. It is very cohesive and unified, and the positions are clear, and that we can implement what we stake out to do, and that we can hold our partners, accountable as well. The days where we just sit and fold our arms and and allow things to be done to us, we want that to be days of the past, right? So we want to make sure that we have a significant place on the table. As they say, if you are not on the table, you're on the menu, and we want to make sure that stops being the case. So that's why we have to amplify Africa's voices throughout.
Okay, Dr. Foretia, now, what message would you want policymakers as well as leaders out of Africa to take home?
Well, thank you. Very important, and it's very clear and simple. It's the issue of partnership. African countries, Africans, it's all about partnership, partnering for each other's interests. It's very clear what Africa's interest is, and we want to continue to amplify Africa's interest, but also understanding what the interests of other countries are. But not imposing, but dialogue, constructive dialogue, to ensure that interests can be aligned, and that collectively, Africa can have the opportunities that, for the most part, at times based on previous agreements or the way things have been structured, have not been able to enjoy that. So that is really the thing that we want, as a takeaway, and to ensure that we are on the table and we are pushing for very mutually beneficial partnerships.
Now, this forum is coming at a time where the continent's population is largely made up of the youths and the women. How can this resource be leveraged to trigger growth and development on the continent?
Women make up 50 to 51% of our population. So not focusing on women is a bad idea. Totally bad idea. And not creating an environment where women thrive is a bad idea. There are unique needs, for our women that we have to be sensitive to and that we have to push for. So it's a demographic, it's a group of our population that we need to pay special attention to ensure that they have the opportunities to thrive. As well as I do, that women have not historically had the same opportunities or similar opportunities like men. And there are still laws in our books that somewhat disenfranchise women. Inheritance laws, for example, are clear examples of that. But if we are going to move forward and really grow as countries and really ensure that every citizen has the best opportunities possible, we have to break down all of these barriers that are put in front of women. It's the same thing for young people. There is the issue of skills and decent jobs. Ensuring that our young folks have the necessary skill is a key expectation of any functioning government. And so that's a group of folks who we have to do whatever we can to ensure that they have the skills, and we have to make sure that there is the environment for businesses to thrive. The government doesn't produce. Mm-hmm. No government in the world is productive. They're putting the rules and enforcing the rules, but production comes from the private sector in the economy out there. So we have to create the ecosystem where businesses can thrive, where small businesses can thrive. The data just as well as I do, that most of our small businesses in Cameroon, in most of Africa, are in the informal sector, and most of them don't survive past their third anniversary. Mm-hmm. That is not a very good results slip, when most of our businesses are not surviving after 3 years. So we have to do a better job to ensure that small businesses can thrive, and that those small businesses, the vast majority of them, are the ones that are providing decent jobs to our citizens.
Now, before we is the most important and significant sector in Africa's economic growth. How can this be improved and leveraged in a bid to boost the transformative efforts by governments and the people of Africa?
You mean the private sector, if I understood you correctly? The private sector is extremely important. It is the most important aspect. The private sector is what is the engine of the economy. It's the engine. The government plays a central role in ensuring that there is laws, the systems are there, there is protection, there are roads, there are other major infrastructural needs. There is electricity, there is good schooling or so, but the private sector is really the core, is the heartbeat of any country. The strength of a private sector is extremely important. Now, 4 or 5 years ago, when we looked at the Cameroon private sector, for example, when you look at folks who are employed in the private sector, when you look at the full adult Cameroonians, more than 60%, 6 out of 10 Cameroonians are, in the agrarian sector. Only about 2 out of 10 Cameroonians are in the private sector. And then in the formal private sector, where you have, social protection available, and where you have some sort of a guarantee availability of your pay every month, that is 1 in 20 adult Cameroonians who are working in that sector. So there is a range of issues that we have to do to be able to strengthen the private sector across the continent, in Cameroon in particular, in Central Africa in particular. And that involves a lot of the taxes that we impose, a lot of our corrupt practices. We need to work on that. There is some progress being made by institutions like GECAM, but for the vast majority of folks, that is not felt, down for the average businessman or woman. So there is a lot there that has to do in ensuring that the fiscal space is there for small businesses to thrive. And the more small businesses thrive, the more governments have resources in their coffers. So the government is in their best interest to ensure that small businesses thrive in order for them as the government to also thrive.
Now, if you have to leave the audience with one important thing they have to take home, what would that be?
It's the importance of the power of one. There is that book, The Power of One. What I mean by the power of one is the power of you yourself, each and every one of us, the power of me, Denis Foretia. I have, I should not feel incapable, to take an idea from an idea format to talking with my friends and my colleagues to say, how do we transform this idea to the next stage? And then you build coalitions and move forward. It is that power. Those are, when you look at all the major changes, industrializations that have happened, big companies that have been started, it has been by a small group of individuals all the time. It is not the entire village that comes down and sits and they agree. It is from a small group of individuals who put their heads together, and then, they take it to the larger group. The larger group buys the idea. It goes to the larger group. They see progress, and then they move forward. So let's believe in ourselves. Let's believe in ourselves. Let's not wait all the time, most of the time, for other folks to come, open our eyes or, create a path for us. We have a lot that we can do, even by just being by ourselves, our ideas, taking it to our friends, our colleagues, and sharing those ideas and moving forward. That is how, we will continue to transform our economies.
Thank you very much, Dr. Denis Foretia, for joining us and talking to us about this very important forum coming on the sidelines of the IMF and World Bank annual meetings. Thank you very much. We are glad to have you.
Appreciate it, Peter. Thank you to your team. Amazing job.
And of course, we hope to have you some other time, probably after the forum, to give us some of the major takeaways.
Thank you.
And that was, of course, Dr. Denis Foretia, the Executive Director of the Nkafu Policy Institute on In-Depth. We thank you very much for watching. Until next time, it's bye-bye. Keep watching Dash TV, the Voice of Africa.